In this particular section, we're going to talk about a work item primer. We're going to look at an overview of work items, traceability between the work items, creating custom queries, work item charting and pinning, and work item tagging. Lastly, we'll talk about configuring projects alerts and notifications. So in video 1, we're going to talk about an overview of work items. So in this video, we're going to look at the work item types, anatomy of a work item, and the customizations you can do to work items. So work item types, there's 3 types. There's the Agile, Scrum, and CMMI. Depending on the template that you choose, you will get a work items that match that particular item. So for example, if you choose Scrum, you have product backlog items as you see on the screen. In Agile, you'll have user stories, and in CMMI, they'll be called requirements. CMMI also has a few extra work item types that aren't found in the Agile and Scrum templates. So now let's talk about the anatomy of a work item. A work item is made up of fields, states, and transitions. Basically, everything you see on the form on the screen is basically a field for the most part. There are states, as you can see in the middle of that actually tell you what state is the work item in, such as new, approved, done, so on and so forth. And transitions. When a state goes from the new to approved, what is the reason for doing that? When you first create a work item, the transition would be a new work item or a new backlog item or a new user story. So let's go take a look at what work item looks like in TFS. Okay, so here we are in Visual Studio. And you can see I'm in the Team Explorer window on the right-hand side. And what I'm going to do is click on this Work Items tab. That's going to take me into the Work Items page where I can actually go about creating a new work item. You can see here I'm using the Scrum template. I can tell that because I have a product backlog item and an impediment work item. And these are the other work items that are available in the Scrum process. So now let's take a look at a product backlog item real quick. You can see it opens up into the web browser. And this is a particular product backlog item where you can see we have a sprint and we have acceptance criteria consistent with backlog items. So now let's go look at the Agile template. So here we are in Visual Studio and we're going to access the Agile work items. We do it the same way as we do the Scrum ones. We open up the work items by clicking on the Work Item tab, and we can create new work items by going up to the drop-down. In this case, you can see we have a user story and an issue. Those are consistent with the Agile template. The remainder of these, the test case, the feature, the epic, the task, and the bug, are all dissimilar to what you see in the Scrum template. So let's go create a new user story. It opens up the web portal because that's where you're going to create the work items in. And you can see right away we have an iteration instead of a sprint. And we have different iterations available to us. We also have a description box along with the acceptance criteria. Unlike Scrum, we don't have a description there. And then we have some other items such as planning. We have story points instead of effort. Effort is available in Scrum, story points in the user story. And then the classification becomes a required field, and this is another field that we have in here that we've customized that we can add values to. And we'll talk about customization a little later. Again, we have the development and the related work items very much like we did in Scrum. So that wraps up looking at an Agile work item. And you can see it's very similar to the Scrum work item. So let's go look at CMMI now. So here we are in Visual Studio, and we're looking at a CMMI project built with Team Foundation Server. And you can notice we're in the Team Explorer again, and we listed out the work items available to us by clicking on the Work Item tab. And from the new work item list, you can see we have a few more work items than we normally would have in our other templates. While we have a bug and a task, we have a requirement. And we have change requests, issues, reviews, and risk. So again, CMMI requires a little more reporting and a little more information as you develop the project. So there's more work items available. So if I click on the requirement to create a new one, This will go into my requirements. So in the requirement work item, you can see we still have iterations very much like we do in the Agile, except this one starts at 0 instead of 1. We also have the impact assessment field, which again is only available in the CMMI template. The state here is proposed rather than new, and the reason is because it's new. So again, a little bit different terminology when you're working with the CMMI template. They tend to work the same and they tend to look the same in terms of their structure. But you can notice here that we have a triage field and a priority field and a size. So rather than having an effort or story points, CMMI uses a sizing method. So a lot of times people use t-shirt sizing or a Fibonacci sequence. So you could put something in here such as extra, extra large if this was a large one. Or you could put in 5 or 6. And again, there's some different fields here. We have a pending field for the triage, and we could actually go and see what other fields we have, values we have. We have a blocked field, and we have a committed field. So you can see there's a little bit more. And then we have the effort in hours. How many hours do we think this is going to take for us to create and finish this particular requirement? And what type of requirement is it? So again, you can see there's more information available to us in a requirement work item for CMMI. And again, there's a schedule. What's the start date and the end date of this particular requirement? And over here, we have a build and test field. Where is it integrated in? What build was this particular work item in? What user story acceptance test have we run, if any? And then lastly, we have subject matter experts. So again, CMMI requires a lot more information than you would find in Scrum or Agile. So with that, let's go back to the slides. All right, so now let's take a look at the customizations you can do in work items. We're going to talk about the work item editor, command line, and permissions. So let's go take a look at that in Visual Studio. So here we are in our virtual machine for TFS, and I'm going to show you how we're going to customize work items. So the first thing you need to do is you need to go to the Tools menu option, and you need to go to the Extensions and Updates to get the Process Editor. Now I already have the Process Editor, but I'm going to show you. You would go to the Online section, and you would type in the Process Editor. And then you see it come up here, the TFS Process Editor template. So there you can see it's been installed already. So we're just going to close this and go back to the Tools option and go to the Process Editor, where we can work with things like work item types, the process templates. That's the whole template. In fact, that's not just the work items, but that's also work item queries are in there, and reporting is in there, and a lot of other items. The work item types is normally what most people are going to modify in a particular TFS project. We also have the global lists, which we explained a little bit about in the first section of this particular volume. And then we have a field explorer, and then we can actually disconnect from the server. So I'm going to select the option of work item types, and you can see I can open a work item type right from the server. I advise you not to do that unless you're just going to review it. Don't make changes directly on that one, because if you do, you're automatically updating the server, and any project that's going to use that going forward is going to have those changes. Or if you check in broken changes, for some reason it's not compatible or not meeting the requirements of a work item type, then you're going to have issues. So I suggest you open it from File or export it. First, we can export a work item type, and we can go to the project and we can select a work item type. Let's select the product backlog item. It's going to ask us if we want to save where we want to save it. It's an XML file, so we're just going to save it. And then what it asks me for, if do I want to include the global list definition. And so we're going to save that with the global list definition. Now we're going to go back to the tools, to the process editor, to the work item types, and open a with from file. So here we are in the product backlog item, and you can see there's quite a bit of information on the fields that are available to us. So what I want to do is I want to create a new field. How I do that is I just click on the new and type in the word, the name of the field. So we're going to call this packed field. And you can pick the type. Now it's important to remember, and we've said this in the other videos, is that when you modify or create a work item and you set its type, you can't change the type later on. You actually have to create a whole new field. So if I were to select this as a string field, but I really meant an integer, I wouldn't be able to create another field called packed field. It would have to be something else. And then the reference name is usually the dot notation. So I could do pack.common.packed_field. Something to that effect. And then a help text. Help text is basically the balloon that comes up when you actually hover over the particular item. And then is it reportable? You can see we have a SQL Server cube underneath, and we can actually set the dimension, detail, or measure. I'm not going to report on this one for now, and we're going to click OK. And you can see down at the bottom here, we've added the packed field. Now I'm going to edit it by going over into the rules. And we can add new rules. And you can see we have a list of rules like allowed values. That would turn it into a pick list. Or existing value. You got a whole lot of options here. Frozen means you can't make changes to the work item. You have a read-only work item or a required field. Again, you can see valid user, suggested values. There's a lot of different options available to you to select rules. So let's say we did the allowed values rule. Then it's going to ask me, for what particular users do I want to add this work item? And we're going to keep it for all users. And so we're going to go to the list item, and we can create a new list item. So we can put in a 1, a 2, another new one, a 3, and we can go on like this. We can save it, and now we have the allowed rules for our field. And we click OK. And now we have a pick list rather than a form field. So next thing we can do is go into our layout. First, let's save this. Let's go into our layout. This is the layout of the particular work item that we're looking at. So in this case, a product backlog item. And it's made up of groups. You can see here, collapse these down. And in a group, you can see we have a column. And in a column, we have a control. This is the particular control that makes up the title. You can tell that because it says system.title here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make my modification in the status area. So again, I'm going to add a control into here. So how I do that is I click on the column and I right click and I select new control. Now you can see I have a whole lot of options here, such as I can create a new column if I click on group. If I click on the group itself, I can right click and create a new column. Or if I click on the column, I can actually create new groups, new tab groups, splitters, move it up, move it down, or delete it. Now remember, if you delete a column, you delete everything in it. So let's go back to the new control, and we're going to call this, we're going to label this. This is what's going to be seen on the work item. And we are going to select the type as a field control. Even though it's a pick list, we select the field control. You can see you have other options here, such as an HTML field or a link control. So you see you have some options there. We're just going to leave it the field. And then we're going to list out the field name. And this is where our dot notation comes in. And there's our pack.common.packed field. And again, our field name is already set. And this is a string array. And we're good. And then where do we want to dock this? We could actually dock it. Fill up the whole work item, a section. We can dock it top, we can dock it on the bottom, we can dock it left or dock it right or dock it none. So we're not going to dock it anywhere. We're just going to let it free flow in the column just like all the other fields are. So again, I'm going to save this now that we've added it. And I'm going to go to the workflow. And as you can see from this workflow, it's pretty busy. This is how you set up the states and transitions in a particular work item. So you can see we have a new work item, we have the done state, we have the transitions. So let's take a look at this. When we go from nothing to new, what's going to happen? So again, we can make changes to that and see what's going to happen. So if I was to click on that, you can see it has a close date field in it. That's going to be set to nothing. You can see when we're done, we have business value and effort that gets updated. And approved has a close date on it. So again, we can go to the transitions and we can look at the reasons. So let's say we want to transition from new to done. That's this one up here. Let's select it. And you can see we have the reason fields. Now let's move it up a little bit. We have the reason fields, we have the work item fields, and then we have the close date. Let's move this one out of the way. And work finished. So the reasons are the work is finished. That's why it's going from new to done. Any actions that we can take. So actions are items like when you check it in and save the work item, what should happen to the work item form, to another field in the form? Do I want to, when I set it to done and save it, do I want to update a particular field? And then you can see we have the close date on the fields. That gets updated. So again, we have the transitions set up, and you can go out and create your own states and transitions. I will suggest that you actually not modify the work item states and transitions that are currently in the work item itself. I found that later on when we try to update the system or do an upgrade of TFS, that sometimes there's a lot of work involved with actually updating the work items. So it's not that you can't change the states and transitions that come with it, the default ones. It's just that if you do understand that later on when you update TFS, you may have some work to do to update the work items. Anything new you add should update really well, and you won't have a problem when you go to update TFS. So in here, I can actually right click and I can validate it, or I can actually go out and create new items. So you can see we have our, let's scroll over, and you can see we have the rest of our work items, and we have a remove, and you put in these fields, these transitions between each particular work item. So if I click on a work item, I can collapse it, and I can actually go up here and I can view the XML now for my particular work item. So let's save this. Let's go up here and view the XML, and you can see it doesn't give us much of an editor here, but it allows us to see the work item. So this is a particular work item as it exists in a product backlog item. So what this is showing me is when I go to save this work item back up in the TFS, I have a whole lot of information available to me, such as the product item name, backlog item, and the fields. There's a lot of the different fields we've added. And here's some more fields we've added. Here you can see this one's required, that's the title. You can see the assigned to is going to allow existing value and a valid user. So what the valid user says is I want to make sure that anybody in the system shows up in my assigned to list. You can also dictate what groups show up. So maybe you only want to assign it to admins. You could put an admin value in there and set that up. And here we have suggested values and list item. So you can see we have none down here for the suggested item. Now we can actually go and modify that, add more list items. When not changed. So when the field system.state is not changed, it turns into read-only on the close date. And again, here you can see our packed field. And there's our value, there's our type, and these are the list items we created. You scroll down in that particular work item, and now you get into the workflow. These are the states and transitions that we created. So for example, here's the states in the workflow. Right here we have approved, committed, done, and new, and removed. And down here we have the transitions. From new to done, what happens? Work's finished. That's the default reason. We can add more reasons in there. Again, from approved to done, what's the reason? And you can see these just have one reason, but you can add multiple reasons. And you can modify them to be whatever you feel like you want to say, such as if it's removed, not just removed from the backlog, but duplicate maybe, or something to that effect. And approved to removed means the same thing. I could add, it's been duplicate or it's completed. I don't have to have the remove from backlog on there if I don't want to. And from nothing to new, we create a new backlog item. So you can see the transitions are pretty straightforward here. So what I want to do now is close this. I've saved my work item type. I'm going to go over into here and close it. And I'm going to go back to my Tools menu, Process Editor, Work Item Types, and I'm going to import a work item type. And basically browse to that particular file, find that particular backlog item, go to the project I want to put it in, and select OK. And now this updated the work item type. So later on when I go to create a work item, I should see that new field. So let's go take a look at it. Let's switch projects and go back to our other project, Manage Connections. And Manage Connections, connect to a project. And we're going to go into the default collection and the default project and connect to that. Now, if I go down here and select the work items and create a new product backlog item, you can see we've added our field right here, the packed field. It's a text field, or a pick list, right here. You can see there's our values. And again, we could very easily make it without picked values, such as the effort, a text field. So that's how you go about creating fields in work items and modify them. There's a lot of information on the internet for this, especially on Microsoft's developer network site, msdn.com. So feel free to go out there and experiment with these particular work items. But remember, I would export it first, make my changes, and then import it. And remember the state, or the field type, the string versus integer versus any other type. Once that type is set on the field, you can't rename the field or rename the type. You have to keep it as it is. If you make a mistake and you want to have a string to an integer, remember, you're going to have to create a whole new field. So with that, let's go back and wrap up. Okay, so let's wrap up. In this particular videos, we looked at work item types. We looked at the anatomy of a work item. And lastly, we looked at how you can go about customizing work items.